really good news. They're bringing out some more food. and they're going to bring it right here.
Right
and
now.
so,
Perfect.
so if you didn't get any, or if you would like some, if you're still hungry, help yourself. Okay? And we'll get started at the same time, maybe, huh? Doug, is that all there is? All right, okay. Well, maybe it's not such good news. So, well, welcome to the sixth time we've run this panel. We've called it Clean Tech Investing in 2010 or 2011 in the past, and last year I think, and we've had a lot of history behind it. In the early days, it was mostly VCs and angel investors, and of course they left the room a couple of years ago, and 2 or 3 years ago we expanded the panel considerably, and we had foundation people and family offices and strategics and international VCs and so forth, and we had 7 or 8 on the panel I think last year. And of course what's happened since last year is we've had an election, and normally we have this event in the fall, in November, December timeframe, but there was so much excitement during the election that we had a different event in October. We had the great energy debate, and it was just spectacular. If you missed that, I know a number of people here went to that. If you missed it, it's been video recorded by our great videographer back there, Hank, and it's on the club website. You can take a look at it. But we had people represent each of the 4 major parties: Republican, Democrat, Green, and Libertarian, and have a debate about what. since nobody else was talking about energy policy, we thought we would. And they did it. They did a great thing. So this time, we've had the election. We've had a surprise result, unexpected, and an enormous amount of uncertainty. You know, and if you're in business, you hate uncertainty. You know, the one thing you want to do as a CEO is eliminate uncertainty from your business plan. You try to figure out ways to get the things that you can't control off the table. And now we have this enormous amount of uncertainty at the federal level. And that's what we decided we would make the theme for this panel this year, and to talk about what might happen at the federal level, what we think, what we've heard. Of course, we haven't heard much of anything, unless something happened today. I guess we had some EPA news today, and then we thought we would talk about what we're doing at the state level, and still have some venture investor representation on the panel. And I have to apologize that Steve Wesley was advertised as being on the panel, but he was called out of town just the day before yesterday for an emergency board meeting. We thought Steve would be great because not only is he a key venture investor in this space, but he's also has been state controller and has run for governor. And so we thought he could talk to both of those aspects. But Mark and I will try to talk to the venture space, and Diane and Trevor and Laurie will talk to the corporate, to the California and federal space.
We're a very poor imitation.
You've done pretty well. Okay, so first, ground rules. So you know, this is the MIT club, so no politics, no name calling, no. This is we're interested in getting results here and having a professional and dignified discussion. So I have a challenge so I have 2 questions. First is and I think this is probably going to be biased by the people that came here. How many people came from people are closer to San Francisco from where you came today than they are from here? Just raise your hands. So I'm going to guess that's a third, maybe.
It's more.
Maybe half. Half. So if this event were in San Francisco, it would be easier for you. Is that right? Than coming here? Okay. Just a test. Okay. So I have another question. I've been told that every major innovation in the energy field since the American Revolution in 1776 has occurred in the United States, and so I'm going to throw this out as a question to the audience and to the panel, and at the end of the time here, I'm going to ask you to tell me if you've thought of one where that's not true. And so I'll throw out the LEDs as an example. LEDs are a tremendous energy efficiency, energy saving device. LEDs were invented here, and so the blue LED, which was done in Japan, doesn't count because it's, the major innovation was here in the States. So if you could think about that, and then I'll ask at the end of the night if anybody can has thought of one that was done outside the United States since the American Revolution. Okay, so energy. So if that premise is true, then the United States has always been a great energy superpower, and energy is important to us for three reasons. It's important for it to be inexpensive, because it's a key contributor, it's a key factor in manufacturing, it's a key factor in our economy, and so if our cost of energy goes up, we're less competitive, costs more money to do things. It's a key factor in defense and security. You can't fly planes without jet fuel, and then of course it's a key factor on the environment, and these three things play off against each other. So the question tonight, or the key theme tonight, is what will happen at the federal level with regard to energy programs. And programs includes policy, taxes, subsidies, grants, regulations, and any other way that the federal government touches us in this space. And I'm going to turn it over to the panel. What we decided, another change we made this year, is to ask each person on the panel to spend about 8 minutes describing themselves, their background, and their organizations. And then we'll have questions and answers, maybe just questions, I don't know, among the panel, and then we'll have Q&A from the audience. So why don't we start with Laurie? We'll start right here on my right.
There you go.
Go ahead.
Hi. Can you hear me? Because they told me I had to talk like this in order to right into the microphone. I'm Laurie Tenhope. I'm the Deputy Director for Research at the California Energy Commission. And the Energy Commission has several responsibilities, but what I'm here to talk about is our research program. And so we invest in clean energy technologies that are going to help us achieve our policy goals. I think one of the questions that Larry asked is, sort of what's ahead. And I think from, California's perspective, our governor and legislature has been pretty clear that we're on a clean energy path, and the election is not changing that. But that doesn't mean there's no impact on, on what we're doing. I mean, we did an informal survey to get some sense of how much funding comes in from the federal government to California for clean energy and climate research. And it was not exhaustive and comprehensive, but the numbers were around $500 million coming into California from just the universities and labs that we contacted. About $300 million for clean energy technology and $200 million for for climate science. And that's that provides a lot of the intellectual capital in the universities that our policymakers rely on for some of the policy direction. My program in research depends on the innovations for the research that we're doing. And some of you are probably spin-outs of that research in universities. So I think we can feel pretty confident and comfortable in California that we're sticking to our goals. The governor's been pretty clear that we're sticking to our values, that we'll do what's needed to make our decisions based on actionable, real science. So just quickly on our program, it's we start by looking at what are the policy goals and sort of establish what do we think are the research gaps and problems that we're trying to address. It's a pretty healthy research fund for a state agency. We have about $120 million that we fund electricity-related research and much smaller natural gas program. Looking for innovations in the lab, and then a lot of demonstration projects. We're really interested in having customers be able to kick the tires with emerging technology. How do they work? And help accelerate a path to market. Some of the things that we're interested, I think some of the trends, I think we know energy efficiency, renewables, et cetera, but some of the trends that we see is much more active participation of the customers in the market, whether it's demand response, electric vehicle charging, renewables, and the integration of these technologies together so that what was typically just a demand for energy is now interacting with the market, being able to provide services back to the market, and that integration creates some challenges and opportunities in terms of communication and control. A lot of excitement, but perhaps the one concern in that area is cybersecurity and how vulnerable our system is as it's more interconnected and reliant on the internet. We're very interested in solving the duck curve, which if you're not familiar, as we put more renewables on the system, we're generating heavily during the middle of the day, and then as our renewables taper off, but load is accelerating, is how to deal with that acceleration in the demand curve with either storage, demand response, or other strategies. So we're really interested in solutions that are solutions other than natural gas, power plant, load following for that situation. One technology we're beginning to explore is offshore wind. When our renewable goal was 33%, we had plenty of onshore solar and wind, but offshore provides some opportunities for balancing when wind is available. It's a little more available in those shoulder areas, which I think is going to be helpful resource, but then we really need to explore some of the environmental implications and technology opportunities in offshore. Something that's perhaps a technology problem, but more of it at least starts as an equity issue, is making sure that clean energy solutions are available to everybody. So we're targeting a certain percentage of our funds to disadvantaged communities and really trying to think about what technologies might be particularly impactful for low-income customers in disadvantaged communities. And so we'll be holding workshops to engage with communities and also technologists on what we might be able to do that would really make a difference there. I just want to say our program is available to all of you. We're very interested in what kind of technology solutions you might be thinking about. Our program is open and competitive, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody about what your ideas are, how to participate in our program.
So Laurie, how much funding is available through the state of California, through all the different programs in the state?
For research in the clean energy space, it's principally with the Energy Commission, so it's about $160 million. If you're looking at incentive money for available technologies, the CPUC is what
billions.
Billions. Yeah. So you'll get the
energy efficiency alone
is
it's 60% of $1 billion a year.
Yeah.
Each year.
So where does the cap and trade money go? What's happening with that?
Well, the cap and trade fund is diminishing, and it's a portion of it is allocated by the legislature, and a portion of it for a series of efficiency and renewable technologies, but not for R&D.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. So Trevor.
Oh, you took the mic.
Is that on? Yeah, no, I got the mic. Hey, my name's Trevor Hower. I'm a partner at the Rhodium Group. We're a economic and policy research firm, and I'm here because I benefited for many years, over a decade ago, on my annual crawls through Beijing of picking Steve Terry's brain on what was happening in the nascent wind sector. So was delighted to come when he emailed and asked. Spent the past couple of years as Secretary Clinton's Energy and Climate Policy Advisor on the campaign, and was very much looking forward to having a different conversation with you all today about the blossoming federal-state relationship on clean energy and climate action, and what your federal government could do to be supportive of the important innovation work that you're doing. And obviously, that's not the conversation that we're having tonight. I can give some high-level points on change in the federal outlook. I'm sure there's lots to dive into in Q&A. So Donald Trump was the first candidate to run a presidential campaign on a active anti-clean energy and climate platform. Past Republicans have been kind of neutral or like mildly supportive, and President Trump was not during the campaign. All the way down to this strange obsession he has with wind energy from a battle he waged around one of his golf courses in Scotland, where he was upset about some wind turbines that were blocking his view. And he has in office in the whatever we're at 50 days of this administration has been moving pretty quickly to implement promises that he made on the campaign. One of the first pieces of legislation that he signed was a Congressional Review Act bill disapproving the stream protection rule, which limited the amount of coal waste that could be dumped into rivers and streams. Has appointed as EPA administrator an attorney general who has dedicated a large portion of his career to destroying the agency that he now runs. And the budget that the White House has proposed would dramatically cut funding, not just to DOE and to EPA, but to NOAA, which does climate research, but a lot of that climate research is weather forecasting. That's important for a lot of different things, including storm protection and preparedness. He is expected to issue an executive order sometime in the next couple of weeks that will direct EPA to end the Clean Power Plan, rumored to be revising the midterm review on light-duty vehicle standards, uncertainty about the future of the RFS. So it's not a great landscape for clean energy and climate action at the federal level. A lot of these things are going to have to go through Congress. That'll gum up the works a little bit, but there's going to be a lot of defense that the environmental community, that the clean energy community is playing over the next few years. Fortunately, there are a number of states, as Laurie mentioned, and as I'm sure Diane will talk about, there are a number of states around the country who are not just reaffirming their commitment to clean energy and climate policy, but will probably be stepping up a little bit into the void that's left at a federal level. Obviously, California is kind of first among equals, but there's a decent list of states where the kind of political climate is supportive of climate and clean energy action, and where you have governors that have a strong inclination to push the ball forward. And that map will likely grow in 2018, which is an election cycle at the gubernatorial level that's pretty favorable for Democrats. There's a lot of term-limited open Republican seats that are up in 2018, and so the opportunities for state-level action are likely to expand. I think when I think about the opportunity set from a policy standpoint over the next 4 years is people in the kind of national policy debate often ignore the magnitude of energy policy that's set at the state and local level. And when we think about where we need to go over the long term in terms of clean energy deployment and addressing climate change, there are a lot of really wicked policy challenges that we have to solve, like how do we deal with the duck curve in California? How do we deal with the fact that I have an O'Keefe and Merrill stove in my house in Oakland that burns natural gas? The EPA will have to pry for my cold dead fingers because I love cooking on it so much. What's the solution that's going to allow me to continue to use that stove in a lower carbon manner? How do we deal with emissions in the transportation sector that are continuing to grow? How do we provide zero carbon transport to people and take advantage of ride sharing? There was a lot of opportunity to move federal policy in that space, but a lot of these challenges are inherently state and local in nature. And we had, over the course of the campaign, put together a proposal for a clean energy challenge that would have provided competitive grants to states and cities to figure out a lot of those challenges, and knowing that ultimately the solution was going to rest at state and local policymaking. And that opportunity is still there over the next 4 years to figure out solutions to some of those challenging policy issues around clean energy deployment that can then be replicated in other states and at a federal level in a different administration. The last thing I would say is, time's going to move pretty quickly. It is 2 years ago, or more than 2 years ago now, when I signed on with the Clinton campaign. We are, 18 months from when a Democratic primary is going to start again. And when you have Democratic candidates that are starting to look for what's the new federal clean energy and climate policy that we should be championing. So it's easy to get whiplash from the election cycle that we just went through. And obviously, those of you who are investors and those of you who have investors, it's hard to look at beyond the next quarter or the next 2 quarters or the next 3 quarters. This is a multi-decadal challenge that we're facing, and in that context, the kind of current political cycle that we're in hindsight, is probably going to look pretty small.
Diane.
Okay. Oh,
How many
that's
mics do you
yours. I'm
need?
already mic'd up. Hi, I'm Diane Grunick, and I've been involved in energy for 4 decades. I actually worked in the first Jerry Brown administration at the agency that Laurie works at on the very first round of developing appliance standards, building standards, the very first fight over turning down a major power plant in lieu of looking at alternatives like solar, like wind, like energy efficiency. I fought a battle to stop a proposed coal plant that PG&E wanted to build right here in the Bay Area. And we discovered an endangered species on the site, and I guarantee PG&E is so happy they don't have a coal plant sitting here in the Bay Area. So I ended up being appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger to the California Public Utilities Commission as a commissioner. And in California, there's 2 major state agencies who deal with energy. And one is the California Energy Commission that Laurie works at. And they primarily focus a lot on setting energy policy. They develop a wonderful comprehensive policy document. They do the state's appliance and building standards that have saved billions of dollars over 40 years. And they permit thermal power plants. They do lots of other stuff, and they run a wonderful R&D program. The Public Utilities Commission, where I was a commissioner at, it has 5 commissioners. It regulates the state's investor-owned utilities. So that's PG&E, Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, and SoCal Gas. And it also does work somewhat still in the telecommunications area, regulates investor-owned water utilities, does some stuff in transportation, et cetera. But it's the agency that is the primary vehicle for implementing the state's Renewable Portfolio Standard, RPS, because of its jurisdiction and oversight over the investor-owned utilities. It also has the ability to put small charges on everybody's bill, and that cumulatively, that actually funds $1 billion a year for energy efficiency that has saved billions and billions of dollars. It also is very involved with this whole effort now of looking at distributed energy resources and how can you change the business model of utilities like PG&E so that we've actually spent decades of thinking about how can you incent utilities so that they make as much money embracing energy efficiency as building power plants and transmission lines. We're now looking at how can we motivate and incent utilities so that they support this whole area coming into existence of people and businesses putting solar panels on their roofs, having storage, having electric vehicles. So I did that for 6 years. It's a wonderful job. I also was in charge of overseeing transmission planning and permitting. We got 3 major transmission lines built in California, over $6 billion in investment, and that's what's now carrying all the utility scale renewable power plants that we've been building onto the grid. So I will say 2 things about transmission. Nobody likes transmission lines, nobody. But if you hear that we are not building transmission and we're not investing in it, that is a myth. That is an urban myth. We have literally invested billions. So I'm now at Stanford University, but this is MIT, and I welcome both. I'll just say that at Stanford we have Secretary George Shultz, who chairs our major initiative in energy, but he also chairs MIT. So, there are so many problems to solve. I think it's great to have really a lot of folks interested from MIT and friends of MIT. Real quickly, what I think about is looking at Trump. Because I have this big state background, that's what I've done. To me, when people talked about the federal energy policy, it was like, we don't have a federal energy policy. Come on now. We have federal laws. We had wonderful efforts by President Obama to move us ahead, but there isn't a federal energy policy. Energy policy is set at the state level. Over 28 states have renewable portfolio standards. The same number of states have goals and standards on energy efficiency. It is the states who are really embracing distributed resources. So to me, other than this huge problem with climate change, and believe me, the loss of the Clean Power Plan is just catastrophic. But what's really the challenge is what Laurie talked about, which is we have hundreds of millions of dollars that flows from the federal government to help do a lot of R&D and demonstration. And, what I'm hearing is just shocking about how much money we may lose. And we're looking at, maybe we'll pass a new law in California to increase even beyond what the Energy Commission has to start to fill up that what may be $500 million or more. So one thing I think it's imperative is for everybody to keep your eye on if there is any legislation that's introduced in California to increase funding in clean energy, to get involved and get out there and say, we're willing to make that investment, because I think that's very, very important. But I think that we still have a tremendous opportunity at the state level to move ahead. It's going to be harder because a lot of activities as simple as people being able to travel if you work for the state and having your plane fare paid for becomes more difficult if you were able to get that funded through the federal government. But I don't think all is lost, and I think that I'm hoping we've reached the tipping point, because if you think about it, if we have enough that already happened under President Obama, under the states, that moved us ahead with renewables, with distributed generation, with solar PV, with storage and EV, the hundreds and thousands of people that are engaged in that effort are not just going to walk away. They're going to really work hard on it. So I'm hoping we actually are that tipping point where we have enough of the political movement. But I study now at Stanford the intersection between technology and policy and investment. I'm increasingly focused on, if you take different things like light bulbs and all sorts of things, how do we understand the technology curve with the policy changes and with the investment? And that's what we don't know. Are we enough at that tipping point that we can have the private sector step up with both the investment and the technology, so that if we have enough policy development continue at the state level, we can still move ahead? And that's the question we're going to face.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Mark.
Thank you. I threw a couple of slides that maybe, are they there? Yeah. Cool. No, that's Diane's nice slides.
Oh, I'll skip that. Those were just the story of energy efficiency, and don't ignore
it.
Okay. Yeah, doesn't matter.
So I just want to put up one slide and then make some comments. But we've all just lived through an amazing cost decline and price decline in solar energy. And those of us that were investors back when things were $9 a watt, you thought you'd be a hero if you could get things down to $5 a watt. Who'd have thought that we'd be headed to orders of magnitude lower so quickly? And that's a victory in many ways. So that's old news. What's interesting, and what I wanted to put up here, is we now, and there was lots of talk about how that was a one-off situation because there was all this pent-up knowledge about silicon and a whole industry around silicon, and so you could drive the cost of solar down on the back of the silicon knowledge base. That would never happen again. Well, the good news is when you plot the cost curve of lithium-ion batteries, they're following virtually the same slope. That never to be repeated again cost decline that went from supposed expert publications that said, you know, we're at $1,200 a kilowatt hour and we'll get to 1,000. GM's now paying $140 for the batteries that go in the volt and the bolt. And we're seeing on the venture side businesses, technologies, opportunities, and scale-up things that are taking it to half that again. So, you know, when a kilowatt hour is $50 to $70 and maybe in a whole, already put in a pack at 100, that's a game changer. So that's just to set the stage. The reason I talk a lot about batteries, I was a clean tech investor at Trident and Vantage Point, and then had the fun job of BMW asking me to help them form their corporate venture fund. And just at the time when they were pivoting or evolving from traditional BMW that we all know and love to the i3 and the i8 and the carbon fiber and the battery cars and thinking about this whole industry evolving from selling hardware to becoming mobility service companies. And so I led their investments in all the charging stuff, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to grid, and related kinds of topics. To talk about, you know, this is an energy meeting, but I'm going to, obviously, a huge chunk of our energy goes towards transportation. Transportation is currently under a massive disruption, and a disruption, I would argue, that's almost all good. You know, we've got 40,000 people a year in the United States and 1 million around the world that are killed by traffic accidents. They're not accidents, they're traffic collisions. They're brain failures by the driver. So if we can have technologies that come out that change life and change safety, but also dramatically change energy demand and ripple into every aspect of society that touches and is adjacent to transportation, freight, delivery, retail, parking, urban planning, the built environment, everything moves by truck or rail, mostly by truck. And if you want to step back to a sort of a macroeconomic argument, if you want to get us from a 2% growth world to a 4% growth world, one of the things you want to do is take friction out of the system. What system are we talking about? If, you know, an easiest way to measure the economy is how many vehicle miles traveled do you have? How much people movement do you have? And how much goods movement do you have? How many ton miles moved are there? And if you can have lower cost of transport, lower cost of delivery, then you're going to have more people movement, more goods movement, and a healthier economy, which is really important because if autonomy puts some millions of truck drivers out of work over the next decade or so, we're going to all have to figure out how do we figure out a retraining effort to do that. Who are you going to vote for? So anyway, we call it, BMW calls it ACES, Autonomous Connected Electric Shared. Mercedes spells it differently. They call it CASE, Connected Autonomous Shared Electric. It is exactly the same thing. And when you think about it, these are the electrification effort that we've all lived through for the last decade has been a hard effort. You know, the goal to have X millions of cars that are electric and X percentage of energy coming from electric has been a push on consumers, range anxiety and other reasons. Tesla's done a great job in spite of that. The good news is these next things, the sharing economy and the autonomous economy, are being pulled. They're being pulled by compelling economic advantages. So even if the government doesn't do anything proactive to stimulate this, they'd have to, even if they tried, I don't think they could stop it at this point. The movement of the Googles and the Apples and the Baidus and the Teslas and a long list of others is already underway. And I think that's going to change that's one of the, if there's a bright spot at this end of the table in the energy picture, it's that I think transportation is going to charge forward in spite of whatever happens.
So you're in gear.
Too cute.
Okay, so some questions. So let's do some very interesting transportation issues, but let's focus on for a moment on the electric utility market. Is that broken? Is the electricity market broken? And if it is, how should we go about fixing it? We've got this situation where renewables are by nature intermittent, and when you have a mandate to keep the lights on, you have to back them up with conventional power plants. And that means that in those plants that you put in place to back up the intermittent renewables cost a lot of money, very expensive. And we see countries like Germany where this has been quite advanced, and the two major utilities there are splitting in half to figure out what to do with it, load up one company with the bad debt and the loans and all that, and the other one is focusing on the renewables. So this is a major problem. The pricing of electricity is not market driven. What should we be doing? What? Go ahead, Diane.
Let me break that down. A major reason why Germany, which is often cited, has a problem is it had an incredibly poorly designed feed-in tariff. And certainly California has not embarked upon saying we're going to import those same issues here. And I actually don't know of a single state in the United States that has made the mistakes that Germany did. And there was a lot of politics. I won't go into it. So using Germany as sort of the poster child, I actually think is irrelevant to thinking about this.
But there are low running costs for renewables.
Yeah.
Zero.
The good news is that the policymakers, the CAISO that runs the wholesale market, the utilities, the vendors, people have actually been working on the duck curve for 7, 8, even 9 years before it was called the duck curve. Right. There's been some wonderful planning and thinking about how we're going to address it. It sort of is a catchy political thing to talk about. And but I personally have studied this a fair amount because I teach a course at Stanford now on development of the 21st century grid. And we have some very sophisticated options for dealing with it that are being funded and implemented. One of them is what's called demand response, which is especially through automation. We can bring down our loads and people won't even necessarily be aware of it, or companies. And this is definitely an area for all the innovation and the software and the data analytics companies to come into this space. We're looking at expanding Western markets to deal with it because we have time differences and the sun comes up at a different time in Arizona than it does in California. We are really moving ahead with storage. We're bringing our electric vehicles onto the grid. So yes, the duck curve is real. It's a real problem. But, you know, when I think about climate change, the duck curve is actually, we know the tools that we need to develop, and we have the technology, the costs are coming down to make it happen. So my particular view is it's a real issue, but is it solvable? And is California going to do a good job on it? I think so.
So your solution would be to price, to offer demand response, to spread the requirement to resolve the intermittency across geography, and to maybe to price maybe some different elements in the price structure. So if you want guaranteed electricity
and storage
and plus storage. So what are the opportunities then for entrepreneurs? What
develop those wonderful demand response companies that really take advantage. A great thing, this is California. We've invested in smart meters. It was an $8 billion investment when I was a commissioner. I oversaw 3 of the 4, not PG&E. We made that investment. So we are like a decade ahead of New York. New York forgot to make that investment. So we actually have a great tool already in place. Companies, you know, the more you can do, in my mind, with sort of the Internet of Things and connecting to buildings and connecting to customer engagement, et cetera, because that's all thinking about how you can make that load more flexible to respond to the duck curve. And then storage, transportation, I mean, all those are actually solutions in my mind.
And yesterday, or the day before, oil went below $50 a barrel. And natural gas is at $2.50 or $3 at Henry Hub. So they're also competing against those things. How low does it have to get?
Is that to me?
Well, to the panel. To the panel. I'm sorry. I don't mean to pick on you. How about someone else on the panel?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of 2 separate questions for oil and gas because they compete in different parts of the energy system, right? But I mean, I think on the power markets question, I think at a national level we have 2 market structure problems. One is a function of politics and one's a function of design. So the one that's a function of politics is that we regulate power at the state level, and we have kind of incomplete wholesale power market reform and power markets that are on non-contiguous state lines. And if you were to design a power market from scratch, you would not design it like the kind of Frankenstein monster that is the U.S. electricity regulatory
He's my
framework,
federal guy.
right?
I'm the state. It's not Frankenstein. But because I look at what have the states done under that Frankenstein model? A heck of a lot.
The second is the problem of design is that, and this was, it made sense at the time. We're moving from a power market where you had dispatchable power that had transportable fuel, right? So you set whether it was a coal generator or a nuclear generator or a natural gas power plant, you could set your generator near load centers, and then you would transport your fuel either by rail or pipeline to the generator, right? And now we're moving to a electricity system where you have non-dispatchable, zero marginal cost power, and it's location dependent because the sun is not equitably distributed and the wind is not equitably distributed, which means you need to move more of your BTUs through in the form of electricity rather than through pipelines and through rail. And at the federal level, we have an asymmetry in how we do infrastructure investment, right? So natural gas pipelines FERC has the ability to preempt localities. The ability to build new natural gas pipelines across the country is pretty large. That authority doesn't exist for transmission. And so at the federal level, we have to reform the way we think about infrastructure siting and infrastructure permitting in a way that's consistent with the type of generation that we're building now.
And opportunities for entrepreneurs would be?
In that space, yeah. I mean, I think that it's on the, and these are, I think there's going to be some opportunities over the next, even over the next 4 years on this, on thinking about how you reinvest and reinvent your cross-state transmission system in a way that is more aligned with the type of generation assets that we're building today, and in the kind of software platforms that you need to manage those cross-state systems.
I think there's also opportunities in better forecasting, better predictability of when your renewable resources are going to be available so that you can effectively match that with demand response or storage technologies. So there are a lot of software and visualization tools that are needed.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of opportunities in new energy. Many of the big oil companies are, if you want to call it, hedging their bets. I mean, on one side, they're lobbying like crazy to make sure some of this stuff doesn't happen. But just in case it does, they want to be in the business of, if we used to move oil, but now we need to move electrons, then we'll move electrons because we got to be powering the cars either way. We may as well make a business out of it. I had a company just today, a large Chinese company, actually a Chinese coal company, that's moving here to set up microgrids and energy storage. So people see this as a need and an opportunity, and money's going after it, in spite of the fact that, as you and I talked about, Aquion went out of business yesterday.
Right.
So it's a tough space, but people are chasing it.
So you see the fossil fuel companies competing against the utilities.
Yes.
That's probably so.
Complicated regulatory-wise.
Right.
But yes.
Right, yeah. So Aquion, so you mentioned Aquion, $190 million in investment, big money from a lot of big VCs. Or if you would have thought that somebody could make it, smart guy, MIT guy, by the way, right?
I mean, it's a company of a bunch of smart people, and between Kleiner Perkins and Bill Gates and smart people putting money in. You and I talked about it a little bit. There are a lot of technologies chasing battery, holy grail, and those that can get on a path that gets cheaper with scale can win. Those that are stuck on a curve that doesn't continue, I think, have trouble. And those that chase safety and energy density win, and those that don't lose. And Aquion had terrible energy density and a cost curve that even at maturity was almost at parity with where lithium ion is now. We're going to see, the exciting part, I think, is we're going to see, the way to think about the auto industry is the auto industry is about to replace every pound of engine and transmission with a pound of batteries. It's not exactly 1-to-1, but close enough. So picture how many megatons of cast iron engines and heavy transmissions you're taking out and replacing with the same weight of batteries. So the scale of batteries is $1 trillion market, literally. And so the huge number of second-use batteries, once a car has had a crash, had a failure, been recycled or whatever, the battery pack's going to come out, and it's still 80, 90, 95% good. It's not going to go to recycling. It's going to go to second-use storage at almost zero incremental cost. So that's the other challenge. If you're trying to pioneer a new technology that's going to compete with free second-use batteries, you better be really cheap.
Pay people to take them, right?
Pay people to take them.
Negative pricing, yeah. So your take on the storage market is scale, safety, low-cost energy density. right? Yeah. And it's $1 trillion market. So let's come back to that in a moment. But how about the rest of the panel with regard to storage? What are your thoughts on storage?
I think I don't know that I could add much to that. I think the cost curve has really come down, and I think it's an intersection of policy and regulation. It didn't hurt that we set really large targets for storage and know that there's a market for it. California set a storage target of 1.3 gigawatts, and that established a really clear signal to the storage market that California was serious, and other states are picking that up. We've seen a lot of companies sort of shakedown of companies, but those cost curves are solid.
And yeah, I want to just reinforce what Laurie said of sort of at the state policy level, what I think creates, a good market for companies. There's lots of different ways to do it, but one of the ways is that you have a state mandate, like a renewable portfolio standard that says your utility shall have X percentage of electricity provided by renewables. Or you have an energy efficiency standard that says, again, generally, your utilities shall, basically procure a certain amount through energy efficiency. And California had, when was our energy storage? Just
a couple of years ago.
Just 3 years ago. It was the first ever done, I think, in the world. And now I believe we're seeing we're going to have storage mandates, just as we had with renewable portfolio standards. And another policy is net energy metering. That it might have started off here in California, too. Might have been the first state, I'm not sure. But, we now, while we have battles over it, we have a lot of states coming into this area. So I think we're going to see that policy development on storage where we're going to suddenly, if I could predict out 3 years from now, I would say we might have 10, maybe even 12 states that are going to have a storage mandate. And once you have a mandate, then that really, I think, activates the market to come in, especially with what, you're seeing on the cost curve going down.
I think what's not clear, and I'd be interested even in some of the other panelists, is where the strongest storage niche is. And we're seeing a lot of diversification of whether that storage is at the end use or it's more at the distribution scale or at the utility scale. And right now, all of them are kind of competing with each other, and it's intertwined with the regulatory structure, because as Diane was talking about the mandate, we have mandates for each of these niches. And so you're not really letting the market kind of decide which niche makes the most sense and which technology has the strongest fit. We were putting our eggs in all those baskets. And so, where the strongest value is, and, I don't think we can continue to keep all of the technologies going and have, we need some choices.
Crystal ball.
Yeah. You're right that we've got a messy situation of for each project trying to figure out do I get the best return on a behind-the-meter project, a microgrid project, a grid scale project at a wind farm, et cetera. I don't. Right now, it's the analysis is almost site-specific, job-specific. Mm-hmm. It's a little more complicated. I wish it was as simple as just where do you put it and what mode do you put it in. I think somebody analyzed it. You probably know better than I do. There's something like 20 different ways that a battery resource can be permitted and priced to make make
That's Rocky Mountain Institute.
Yeah, well,
they
Rocky
have a wonderful
did it,
little
and
chart. And
Southern California,
Lawrence
SDG&E did it,
Livermore.
and it's the problem is if you want to do both ancillary services and frequency response and time of day shifting, and and there's 20 of these that are all different ways of moving electrons. You're not allowed to sort of dynamically allocate your battery to use, maybe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon you want to be mostly doing this, but at 3 o'clock in the morning you want to be doing that, and you should be able to use your battery dynamically through time for whatever makes the most money and provides the best value to the grid. And that, as I understand it, the FERC has said, no, you got to sort of declare this and live with it, and that makes it a big problem.
Yeah. And this is one of the looming challenges we're going to face, which is that because so many states went to the wholesale markets, they lost control and lost jurisdiction, and all these wholesale markets are regulated by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is 5 commissioners sitting in Washington, D.C., and the rules of the game are the sitting president gets to both name the chair and have a majority. There's 5 commissioners. So when we were hoping, I can say this, that it was going to be President H. Clinton, we were definitely looking at a FERC regulatory structure that was going to be at least 3 Democrats, that was going to revise the rules because they have to be revised. They were never set up to really enhance storage and support it. And they had opened a docket proceeding to look at how they can really support storage. FERC is down to 2 commissioners now, both Democrats. Lots of lobbying going on to at least get them back to a quorum, because now they can't take any action. But one of the big risks we face that President Trump will control is who is going to be appointed to the FERC. We know it's going to be 3 Republicans. We know one of them will be the chair, and they can bring to a stop, an absolute stop, the efforts that we need to have on the wholesale market to allow the market rules to be giving revenues to storage. So I still want to be really upbeat. Everybody should go into storage. But it is going to be a challenge. But regulation
risks like that don't help the market.
Yeah, regulation moves slowly, and luckily, as Trevor reminded us, 18 months from now, we're going to be in another election cycle. The problem is there'll be appointments that will last, I think, for terms of 5 years, 4 years. It's something, but it's a risk.
So back to storage. I think somebody said 20 different application categories for storage, and I'm presuming that's stationary storage for the grid. Yeah. So in addition to that, there's also storage that goes into cars, mobile storage, right, and storage that goes into personal devices and stuff at your house and so forth. So if I was an entrepreneur, I'd probably want to know what are the requirements for each of those applications. Recharge time, discharge time, power rating, weight. The density, the energy density for a car or portable device is quite different than it is for grid storage. Where is a good place to get that information? Where does anybody know where that is? Is it available at FERC?
Your question is what type of battery?
Yeah, if I were going to design a battery for some application, one of those 20 applications, I'd want to know, what do I have to do? What do I have to deliver?
Here's my cynical response: you're going to hire a consultant or an attorney, right, who specializes in this area, because it is complex. I mean, There's not a go-to place. And with 20 different entities giving value streams, you're going to hire an expert in it.
Okay.
I think one place to look, though, is the CPUC use cases for storage, where they've defined the time duration and the capacity. And so for different some of the different value streams have different requirements, and those are specified and then bid into the PUC market.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So back to transportation. We have this California high-speed rail project, and it's been estimated to cost as much as $70 billion. And if the new Tesla, the next Tesla is $35,000, you could buy 2 million of those cars. And they solve the last mile problem. They come and pick you up when you want to be picked up, where you want to be picked up, and they take you where you want to go when you want to go there. Why aren't we doing that instead? What are the reasons that we would do a high-speed rail versus? And Laura, you can absent yourself if you want, right? But why don't we? And think of all the jobs that would create in California, right, to build 2 million Teslas. Panelists.
I'll just say this reminds me, I read, I think, because I still read newspapers, I'm a certain age. I think it was the Chronicle had an article about the connector that was built out to the Oakland airport, the BART connector, and that it was, I don't know what it was, 60 million, 100 million, 500 million. I don't remember the number. But there was a certain amount of ridership that had to happen to be break even, which it was achieving up until this last year. And what they discovered was that if you're a single traveler, especially on business, you may take it. But the economics are you can take Uber if you're a family, and families are using Uber, and it's cheaper to use an Uber than to use a BART. And that's what came to mind was, as we're thinking about these large infrastructure investments, we are assuming whether it is a major transmission line costing $5 billion or it's a BART connector or it's whatever, that the technology that we're used to is what we're going to have in the future. And I don't envy BART because it's not clear for this connector that they're going to get that ridership. And so that's where, to me, with transportation, and frankly, the high-speed rail was conceived 10 years ago, even before Governor Brown. And it was based upon an assumption that really the smart system of the future, and especially dealing with climate change, was to get us out of our airplanes and out of our individual cars into a high-speed rail. And it's not really clear right now with all these changes going on with transportation, in my mind, that that's still the right way to put whatever is the billions of dollars of investment.
Yeah, I grew up in Detroit, and if you asked me 6 years ago if I would make an investment in an autonomous driving transportation project, I would have said, what planet are you on? But it has really changed in 6 years. It's dramatically changed. And now, and as you say, this started 10 years ago. So other comments from the panelists? What should we do about this? I mean, I'm presuming these $35,000 Teslas would have autonomous driving as well, and all the features that we're thinking of. So,
well, there's some car companies that love your solution. That's for sure. I was following up on this BART thing. The crazy thing, you got to hear this. The BART just published this thing that ridership is down, and they've lost some revenue, and now it's not break even or it's not whatever. They've got some gap in the budget. So their solution to a problem of not enough ridership is raise the price. I swear to God, that's what they announced.
Market economics.
It's like, what are they thinking? Anyway, and that begins the slide that ends badly. But your point of on-demand services being managed to fill very dynamic needs in terms of transportation is a really important one. And obviously having, 35 million Teslas or whatever isn't necessarily the solution. But depending on the load requirements at any one time, whether it's a robotic shuttle or a autonomous car or a bus or whatever, I mean, this can be managed in very smart ways. And there's even locally now, anybody work at Apple? Okay. Oh, cool. The shuttle to move people between buildings is just scheduled shuttles, always staffed, always running often enough that nobody has to wait more than 10 minutes. You know what it costs to move a person between buildings? $60. $60
On the Apple campus.
Call the Uber driver.
Just on exactly. Well,
Is that
and
right?
so one of our companies went to them and said, "We will manage your inter-building transportation in an on-demand way. Some of it will be scheduled shuttles because we know when that peak time is justifiable, and for other moves, we'll use on-demand services." And that dynamic allocation between fixed shuttles and big transportation, small transportation, timely transportation has cut their cost of moving a body from building to building in half, which is lucrative for everybody. And that's just an example, but that's starting to happen on corporate campuses, college campuses, city, paratransit services. They're all going from scheduled thing with expensive, hello, dispatch, to on-demand services, cell phone. It's changing fast.
Well, then you've got, with autonomous vehicles, a tremendous social equity benefit for seniors and disabled who,
Right.
will have mobility that they just don't have now, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, other comments?
I think you just do Hyperloop.
I'm going to make a comment, which is California weaned itself off of any in-state coal 3 decades ago. We never had that much. Then we, frankly, exported our pollution by building coal power plants out of state. But we're well on the track to weaning ourselves off of that. So, and because we didn't have any significant coal resources in the state, frankly, we've avoided the political issues of a Wyoming, of a Kentucky, the other places where there's very real unemployment with the coal miners, and then, if there's the power plants there, et cetera. So I'm wondering, though, as we're looking at sort of leading the revolution on transportation, where there are going to be disruptions of, everywhere from our bus drivers to our BART employees to our truck drivers, et cetera, with a world of autonomous vehicles, of more on-call demand, et cetera, if we should also give some thought to how we can politically manage what may be a very fast change, relatively speaking, in a lot of workers who were invested in a sector and in an industry and sort of in a lifestyle that could change within 5 or 10 years. And so I just throw that out there, that part of it is not just the technology and the price and all that stuff, but we never had our coal problem. And potentially with transportation, we might have a lot of workers who aren't going to be embracing this quite the same way that some of the rest of us might.
Yeah, so there's an article in today's paper about the 50,000 person shortage in the trucking industry, but I think you're right. I think in all those. So your colleague Jim Sweeney had talks about the train industry going through a transition from one engine technology to another just after World War II. It was probably coal.
I hope I don't have to report the research.
It was probably coal to electrodiesel, right? Yeah, and he said the entire fleet changed in 12 years.
That's right.
I mean, is that possible? Can we see that with EVs and autonomous driving? Are we going to be 12 years? Or, I mean, there's 80 million cars in the fleet in the United States. The average tenure on the road is 10 years.
Yeah, I'm less worried about replacing the embedded fleet. That's going to age and retire over time. But, looking at what are you buying in 2021 or 2025, that could tip over to be autonomous and electric pretty fast.
Yeah, especially with that curve you've got there on the lithium ion, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So switching gears unless there's another comment anywhere. So we like Teslas with autonomous driving.
Especially if they go to Laurie's places of the disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, there you go. Well, they would. They would go last mile anytime you want, right?
Yep.
Think about, we often fall into the trap of when we talk about transportation, only talking about people movement. The other half,
freight as well.
In many ways, maybe the more impactful half is what it's going to do to goods delivery, how it affects retail and retail design, malls. If delivery, I mean, we've started to get used to Amazon Prime showing up multiple times a day everywhere. If you go shopping, you won't walk out with a bag anymore. You'll just try it on, say, yep, that's the one, and it'll be delivered. And everything kind of works that way. But if everything works if delivery is free and delivery is very low cost, then I think the beneficial impacts ripple upstream. Yes, we've got drivers out of work, but we're going to make more goods because we're going to be shipping a lot more stuff. Right. So hopefully it balances out.
Other thoughts, comments?
I mean, I don't disagree with that. I'm just thinking that we really do want to sort of collectively give some thought to, how are we going to manage this transition if we think there is going to be some significant displacement of jobs, that we don't fall into what was a little bit of a rough transition with coal miners and people working at coal plants, and not really having as much support as is needed. I personally, now I think about it, would like to have sort of, Governor Brown the next time, when he announces where we're going to what we're going to be doing on transportation, to also be directing, maybe it's a task force or something, but to say it's going to be a priority to think about the actual people whose jobs may be displaced, and to set a leadership role for California as these changes, these massive changes in transportation, because I think you're right, we're going to see it within a generation. How could California be doing a good job about managing that change in employment?
Did anybody hear the NPR story earlier today on the container ships at the Port of Oakland? It was really well done. But the point was, in the space of just a few years, you went from guys carrying things onto ships, longshoremen manually loading ships, to container just boom, 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 and out of there. And that rippled through not just the jobs of loading the ship, but you used to manufacture right near the port. Now you no longer needed to manufacture near the port because the containerized stuff could go to the factory. It completely turned manufacturing into a distributed project. It had very interesting ripple effects, but I think they mirror what we're going to see here.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Look, the only thing is that geography matters, and labor markets are sticky. And when we were looking at trade liberalization in the 1990s, an economic model would tell you that there's going to be winners here and losers there, but it'll all net out. But
it does.
It might net out in the economy as a whole, but nobody lives in the economy as a whole. They live in places, and they have certain skill sets, and when those transition issues are not seriously thought through, it has significant political consequences because losses tend to be concentrated and gains tend to be diffuse, right? So, I mean, we certainly saw that with trade, and we see it in the energy sector now. I mean, nationally, I grew up in Wyoming. We mine half the country's coal. When you look nationally, we were at 90,000, 100,000 coal mining jobs when President Obama took office. We were at about 55,000 now. That's out of a labor force of 150 million. It's 0.1%, 0.2% of nationwide employment. But those jobs are highly concentrated. So if you're in Mingo County, West Virginia, you have total countywide employment of 8,000 5 years ago. And you've seen your countywide employment drop in half because 80% of the county either works in coal mining or is supported by coal mining, and there's just not a lot of other opportunity in Mingo County, West Virginia. It's the same in Campbell County, Wyoming, or in Kentucky, and that those concentrated losses have significant political ramifications, and I think it is particularly incumbent upon the investors and innovators in those disruptive technologies in this area to be thinking about that, not just because it's the right thing to do from an equity standpoint, but nothing's inevitable. There are political backlashes, and kind of thinking smart strategies about how you manage political transitions are important.
Yeah, so in addition to all the technology opportunities and business opportunities in the energy space, there's yet another opportunity, which is to displace jobs. And maybe there's an opportunity for somebody to create a company to retrain people into new facilities, new positions, right?
But how do you incentivize making wind turbine modules there instead of coal mining? I mean, they're all skilled jobs. I don't know. Somehow we got to incentivize that kind of stuff.
We have the reverse. I'm sure you know about there's a bill in the Wyoming legislature that's been introduced that would prohibit Wyoming's utilities from having any wind or solar projects if those projects serve native Wyomings. I'm not kidding. Now, as a native, you probably want to offer.
Yeah, I mean, it failed. The legislative session closed. I mean, those messaging bills happen in lots of places. That didn't pass. There was a proposed, legislation to put a tax on wind. That didn't pass either. But those are natural outgrowths when you are a single industry dependent community and you see that industry under threat. Your elected representatives have to show that they're doing something. And, and the challenge is that when you have these really dramatic restructurings in local economies, diversification takes a long time, right? And so for Central Appalachia, the answer is probably not going to be replace fossil jobs with renewable energy jobs. Those folks don't really care whether it's an energy job. It just needs to be a job.
Exactly, right.
And, and there are opportunities there. I mean, greater penetration of broadband enables a level of economic activity, a type of economic activity that used to be precluded because your only logistics option was freight or highway, and you're in the kind of rolling mountains of Central Appalachia. But it requires, there's no silver bullets. It's really hard, and it requires some thoughtful planning.
Okay, so let's switch gears for a moment. There's a group that came together recently since the election. George Shultz, our aforementioned good friend at Stanford, who's an MIT PhD, by the way, is part of that, as well as Jim Baker. And it's called the Climate, let me find my notes. It's called the Climate Leadership Council, and they've made a proposal to deal with the carbon situation. And it has it's called a conservative case for carbon dividends. And by the way, conservation and conservative, they have the same root, which means not to waste anything, right? To conserve, right? So this proposal has 4 pillars. The first pillar is a carbon tax, and they estimated perhaps $40 a ton, but they didn't know where the number should be. The second was a carbon dividends payment, and at $40 per ton tax, that would equate to a $2,000 dividend to each family of 4 in the United States. And this is the United States $40 a ton tax. The third was a border adjustment tax, so that if we were importing or exporting energy to other countries that had a carbon component, that would get equalized at the border, plus or minus, depending upon whether the other country also had a carbon tax. And then the fourth pillar was eventual elimination of regulations no longer necessary after the enactment of a carbon tax. So let me ask the panel. So remember now, this is a bunch of conservative Republicans who've been against carbon taxes, against any of this stuff for a long period of time. Now we have the Republican Party dominating both the Senate and the House as well as the presidency. And, you know, a lot of uncertainty at the top. What do you think about this proposal?
Well, I should disclose that I'm part of the Schultz-Stevenson Energy Policy Task Force, so I've been involved in some of the discussions over its development. And for those of you who don't know, Secretary Schultz has been a wonderful supporter of clean energy, a believer in climate change, but he's also a very serious market economist. And so for a number of years now, he has been absolutely proposing a carbon tax as an insurance policy. So even if you have your doubts about climate change, given the catastrophic consequences, if it's real, it's a smart thing to do. It used to be called a revenue neutral carbon tax, but I've forgotten at one of our gatherings, it's moved to the new term. And the idea that he has, which I think is makes sense if you're trying to get the Republicans in Congress on board, is instead of having an approach like California where you have a cap and trade and you have lots of money that then the government can take from those revenues to be funding a high-speed rail, which starts to get you into the politics, that the money that would be raised from the carbon tax would just go back to the people. It would actually be administered under the plan by the Social Security Administration. I can't remember if he gave the details of that or not. The difficulty, I think, is that when this was rolled out in Washington, D.C., there was very little overt Republican support for the proposal in Congress. And that's what it's really going to take, is that there's enough Republicans in Congress who say it's serious enough, we should get on board. And so, you know, it'll be, I think there's a new, you might know Trevor better than a new climate change caucus that's developing in Congress. I think I've been reading about it, that is attracting some Republican members. So maybe we'll see something happening, but at least as from everything I know, you can certainly debate the details of this proposal, but it was really tried to engage the Republicans in Congress who acknowledge climate change is either real or it could be real, and we should think about it. But I think, unfortunately, in this sort of political turmoil we're in, none of the Republicans see an upside. Now, as it gets closer to elections, maybe that'll change. Trevor?
Yeah, just as a little background, obviously the Republican Party has a proud tradition of environmental protection and conservation. Most of our landmark environmental laws were passed by Republican presidents. Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act was Nixon. George H.W. Bush negotiated the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. That is the kind of primary international treaty on climate change. I'm all the way back to Teddy Roosevelt. And as recently as the 2008 Republican Party platform, there was a strong commitment to address climate change. The Republican Party in 2008 nominated as their standard bearer a candidate who had authored cap and trade legislation and had pledged to make climate change a top 3 priority issue. And there wasn't a lot of contrast on energy and climate issues in that race in 2008 because both John McCain and Barack Obama supported cap and trade legislation. Over the past 8 years, the Republican Party position on this has changed dramatically. By 2012, all mention of climate change was stripped out of the Republican Party platform. And in 2016, that was replaced with a kind of line-by-line assault on clean energy and climate action. And it's a function of the Republican Party's base politics, their primary politics, and their money right now. And it's pretty hard for elected Republicans to overcome that. So, you've had these impressive efforts by former elected Republicans and Republican thought leaders, for years now to put forward conservative, principled, market-based climate solutions. And this recent effort, particularly getting Jim Baker on board, was pretty impressive. And George Shultz has been out championing this for a while, and getting Jim Baker engaged was pretty important. There have been no elected Republicans who've raised their hand yet on this, and it is certainly not a priority for President Trump. So I think it moves the conversation in the right direction. It helps create some space for a conversation. It's an unmitigatedly positive development. I'm not holding my breath for a Nixon goes to China climate moment by Donald Trump in the next 4 years.
Other thoughts? Yeah, well, we can hope.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Okay, so I have 2 more questions, and then we'll turn it to the audience for questions. So one is totally off anything we've talked about. Just a quick take on, we turned off we're going to turn off one of our remaining nuclear plants. So just your thoughts on nuclear fission, and if you got some insight into something that might affect nuclear fusion so that it is no longer the energy of the past, the future, and forever, right? Anybody.
It's not in our portfolio at all, and don't see it in the near or midterm for California. So the federal government and ARPA-E are putting some money there, but it's really not something that I personally have expertise in, or that we see any policy direction to support.
Yeah, so I guess being that, the one not engaged in California politics, I can say nice things about nuclear power. I don't have anything to offer on fusion, but I think my general outlook on this is climate change is a really hard problem, and it needs as broad a political coalition and as broad a technology set as possible to solve it. And and so it doesn't make sense to be taking options off the table because we're having a hard enough time with with an expansive set of options. There is nuclear power brings a political constituency with it. Not just Republican supporters, but organized labor in a way that can be politically helpful. The other part is, we think about this normally in the electric power space. Electric power is important. It's 25% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, right? There are lots of other large sources of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions that we have to tackle, like the industrial sector, where half of all energy consumed is heat, is processed heat, and we need to find ways to generate process heat. And you can generate process heat with electricity. You can generate process heat with high-temperature advanced nuclear reactors, too. And when you start looking at applications in the industrial sector specifically and what's going to be required to reduce that, which is 20% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, then there's some more interesting nuclear applications that show up.
You can think about the nuclear issue as different silos. There's a bunch of existing nuclear power plants. And the quandary there is that I believe the majority of them are in states that have wholesale markets that are agnostic to technology. And the problem is that everybody who embraced wholesale markets as we're looking at markets agnostic of technology has suddenly come up against nuclear power doesn't do well in an agnostic technology market. And so what's happening is then people turn to the states and say, could you impose additional charges to your utility customers to basically subsidize the continued operation of those nuclear power plants? That's what New York did as part of a big political deal. And that's starting to play itself out. Will states say we will impose those charges, which they may because there are jobs in the states. But we don't have an ability at the federal level for, again, FERC to step in and say, we have a federal energy policy, because remember, we don't, that will impose charges somewhere socialized across everybody to keep these power plants operating. And I can't see politically, frankly, that's an issue FERC's going to really take on. So that's sort of, the existing nuclear power plants are not in a great situation in that they have to be bailed out at the state level, and that's very much a political issue. For the new nuclear power plants and for, what could be some promising uses of nuclear in industry, President Obama had an all-of-the-above approach, and former Secretary of DOE Ernie Moniz, MIT guy, he, was a nuclear physicist. I think that's my memory. And he really put a lot of effort into trying to solve this quandary of could we get enough DOE R&D in the nuclear sector to really get that next generation of nuclear on board? How can we look at it? And, my concern is if somebody as bright as Ernie, put all that effort into it and we didn't really move the needle, and this does require federal funding in big ways to make it happen, what's the chance that it's going to happen under President Trump?
Yeah,
I mean, that's to me sort of the issue. Now, Trevor, you may be closer to a hopeful solution.
There's some exciting work in the advanced nuclear space. There's some new advanced nuclear designs that are going to file for NRC licensing. So I think this technology has a long lead times, and I think that a lot of the investments that the Obama administration made in this are starting to yield. On the existing fleet side, as Diane said, there's a lot of these plants that are in merchant markets. That are having a challenging time competing against zero marginal cost renewables and low natural gas prices. The interesting thing, if you look at the New York regulatory decision, the benefit provided to nukes in New York is based on a calculation of the climate benefit that continuing to operate those plants provide. So they used a federal social cost of carbon estimate to value the emissions benefit of keeping those nukes online, and instead of as opposed to retiring them and replacing them with natural gas. And I think that's a valid approach to take in state regulatory policy. State regulators are tasked with looking broadly at economic and economic benefits, public health impacts, and New York regulators chose to value explicitly, in the way that the federal government under President Obama did in regulatory proceedings, value the emissions and climate benefit of those plants and how they're valued in the market.
Yeah, full disclosure, I glow in the dark. I was on nuclear submarines in the Navy. No, actually, I don't glow in the dark. But so having spent a lot of time in nuclear power, I guess. I love that there's new models that are safer and more modular and lower and better. I think the regulatory and political baggage that nuclear brings along, and it violates sort of that principle I raised of, can you get it on a declining cost curve? And so far, it's always been up and to the right in cost, not down. So I think there's just, we're not short of energy. We're short of ways to collect it. We get plenty of energy hitting the earth every day. All we got to do is capture it.
Switching gears a little bit, the federal budget for the Department of Energy is something like, for this projected year, is something like $32 billion, of which something like $12 billion in the DOE is set aside for science. And a lot of that goes to the national labs, the 10 or 11 national labs. And some of that $12 billion, and I don't know the number exactly, but I suspect it's around $1 billion maybe, that goes for ARPA-E and EERE and some of the other agencies that would be helpful in this space. And I know we just got a new secretary for the Department of Energy last week, so everything is up in the air. Has anybody heard anything? What's the G2?
I heard today, but Laurie, you were back in D.C. at the ARPA-E, so you hopefully have better knowledge. But in DOE, sort of the way I think of it, if you take out the nuclear world and the science world, they've got two main divisions or branches: EERE, Energy Efficiency and Renewables, and OE, Office of Electricity. What's OE?
It is.
Office of Electricity. I heard today that an EERE is the more robust in funding. I'm sure you've got better details on it. But it gives out a lot of money, and it also sets the appliance standards at DOE, et cetera, et cetera. I heard that, this again is total speculation, that they're being asked to identify a budget cut of somewhere between 25 to 50% of EERE. And sort of the problem on the expectation, for example, we're not going to have any new appliance standards. We're going to gut or eliminate what we're doing with Energy Star. And, you know, all these programs are just going to not happen. And if so, that has very big ramifications for where all the grant money goes. And the national labs, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, it has over 60 people who work on the development of energy efficient appliance standards. And so if we're no longer in the business of actually trying to have our products that we use more efficient through standards, there's going to be dramatic ripple effects. But this is speculation.
Yeah, we won't. I mean, the headline number that Trump's budget's proposing, in an order of 30% cut in DOE funding, that has to get appropriated by Congress, and it's going to be a battle. I mean, even with the Republican-controlled Congress, DOE has patrons and supporters in Congress. Those labs exist in people's districts. DOE learned from the military's base strategy that even if it leads to a little bit of duplication of effort, having geographically dispersed labs can become helpful when you have to fight for your appropriation. Because I mean, you look at NREL in Colorado. NREL generates $1 billion of economic activity for the state of Colorado, right? So if you're Cory Gardner, you're a Republican in the Senate, you're going to fight pretty hard for NREL's appropriation. So where they end up netting out between the kind of Trump slash and burn, cut off half the building and set it on fire budget proposal to wherever the appropriators end up on, I'm not sure yet, and that's a fight we'll see over the next few months.
So, Laurie, you were there.
Well,
right?
I would just, people are very circumspect, so they're not really, wanting to put themselves out there or be negative, because it's sort of like, you put it out there, it'll come true. I mean, at ARPA-E, there was a difference between what people said and the aura. I mean, it was, people were saying positive things and that felt that, there had been bipartisan support in the past and expected that in the future, but the whole tone of the summit was subdued. I think Office of Electricity is more positive about their future because they focus, they can easily pivot to reliability and resilience. They're about the smart grid or just the grid, and you need you need that infrastructure no matter what the energy system is. And so I think they were feeling fairly positive about the future. EERE is worried, and the labs are worried.
And ARPA-E, where do they fit in?
Pardon me?
Where does ARPA-E fit in? Are they under OE, Office of Electricity, or?
No, they're their own. They're their own group, and I think they expect that there'll be some reprioritization of the advanced technologies that they're focused on.
So I want to turn it to the audience for audience questions, but before I do, are there any other comments anyone would like to make? Deal. Okay. So we have 2 microphones, and we have 2 volunteers. So if you grab Teresa and Bill, and maybe one of you go up on one side and one go on the other side, and so wait till she brings you the mic. Or Bill brings you the mic, I guess, huh? You have to turn it on.
So recently, this book came out from Ms. Mayer about dark money.
Can you speak up a little?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm talking about this book called Dark Money from Mayer, the author is Mayer, and it talks a lot about our illustrious MIT alumni, the Koch brothers. And they've been using their money to basically protect their oil and gas investments and their wealth to actually work the state and local level to their advantage. And I would say that part of what you were talking about how the politics have changed in the last 8 years on the Republican side is probably a lot to do with their efforts to. And I'm just wondering, the question really is, can they actually make the government aggressively attack renewable energy, clean energy, that not just defunding it, but like enact laws to get in the way, right? Just because the oil and gas industry is wants to preserve their investment, preserve their wealth.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly, groups like the Koch brothers have spent a lot of money on energy and environmental policy advocacy at the federal level, but have been even more engaged at the state level and in state electoral politics in general, and is part of the reason why Democrats are so weak in state legislatures and governors' offices, because Democrats haven't spent the same amount of money and level of focus on state politics. Interestingly, of all of the candidates in the Republican field, Trump was least beholden to that traditional Republican donor base. I mean, he didn't raise that much. He raised barely any money during the primary, almost no money during the primary. He raised a fair amount during the general.
He seems to be beholden to others.
Right. So I think the question about that influence channel has more to do with action that Congress takes, and certainly there's already been congressional action. Like I mentioned at the top, Congress disapproved the stream protection rule. How Congress approaches the budget and DOE and EPA funding will be influenced by outside spending groups, and then there will be bigger fights, like, does a Republican-controlled Congress try to permanently remove from the Clean Air Act EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases as a pollutant, right? So it's one thing to undo the Clean Power Plan, which is a single regulation derived off of authority that EPA believes that it has under the Clean Air Act to regulate greenhouse gas emissions, and that the Supreme Court upheld. But Congress could choose, and the president could sign into law, legislation that would remove EPA's ability to do that forever under any administration in the future. That is a fight that progressive states are gearing up for, that environmental groups are gearing up for. Likewise, you could see fundamental changes to PURPA or to the Federal Power Act in Congress that would be very difficult for subsequent administrations to undo. So I think that's, if you're concerned about that influence channel in specific, it's less about the White House and more about what Congress does.
But the mandates for utilities to purchase renewable power are all at the state level. And I don't think we have on the table even a concept that there's going to be a federal law that preempts that, because so much is embedded in constitutional agencies like PUCs. But as Trevor said, we do see a lot of money flowing in at the state level that can change who's in power at the state level, in the legislature, which are the entities that have enacted these renewable standards. So it's not an immediate threat, but it certainly is part of this more general threat. But it is not something for the renewables directly, aside from all the tax incentives, which are going to be their own issue at the federal level. The actual mandates to purchase renewables are set at the state level.
Another question.
you mind if I do one, since I have the microphone? It's more of a comment than a question in response to your question, Larry, about high-speed rail versus Teslas. And I wanted to add information about a study, I think it was done about 10 years ago out of the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UC Berkeley. And what they did was they studied how much it would cost to build new road infrastructure and maintain the existing road infrastructure to meet the projected population growth in California. And they did that with and without high-speed rail. And actually it was a situation without high-speed rail that was more costly. And this was 10 years ago, so I'm sure a lot of things have changed. I'm sure the budget for high-speed rail has bloated considerably since then. But at the same time, after many years of record temperatures, the costs of maintaining roads has also grown pretty significantly. There's roads buckling, and bridges and other infrastructure are really not built for the world that we're living in now. So I wanted to add that.
Any other questions? Okay, one more here.
Is this working? Laura, you mentioned you're exploring wind power in California, coastal, in the ocean. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Other than areas, well, it won't be like Santa Monica and Pebble Beach. Where would these be located?
We're just starting to, we're actually exploring this for our next investment plan. So we don't have plans for where wind would go, but the wind resource is promising. There's a tremendous amount of work to be done on what the environmental implications would be, what kind of technologies, marine, whale, et cetera. But I think the first places you would look is where there's already some transmission access for existing offshore.
And many of the coasts are national sanctuaries. Presumably it would not be in those. Is that correct?
They would not. But
maybe your front yard?
A lot of wind near the Trump Golf Course, I think, in Palos Verdes.
Bert Wank with InfiniRail. First of all, thank you for staying that late on a day like this. Exciting to be back here. Spent a lot of time in India, into energy problems there. I was wondering if you could comment on a more agile way to really solve the debacle on investing and financing and startups via the university path. We can't boil the ocean now. Battery investments, we know A1 to 3. It's very challenging. I'm in hardware, and it's like I don't even ask Larry for money anymore. It's like, hardware and investment are just juxtaposition. So we got to work smarter around this. And I hate going back and forth to India. I'd like to develop it here. So when I talk to UT Austin, there seem to be a little bit more accommodating with technology licensing. I know we're talking about MIT here. So I was wondering if there is a way to make it easier to utilize the labs, either at the university or potentially even strategic partners. There's a big announcement. I think the startup Autobahn, now Mercedes and BMW got together, huge lab in Germany and Stuttgart. They fund an incubator on this because big companies don't innovate, they buy businesses. So is there something we can do legislation, policy-wise, influencing on a shorter term with universities or local corporate policies, local tax incentives? You have to make money first, but something that is quicker to implement within the 18 months or the next couple of years.
Is your question to make the facilities at the lab available to entrepreneurs?
Some programs, some incentives, some ways to accelerate hardware, particularly development.
I think that's exactly what Cyclotron Road has done at LBL with federal funding. So one of the folks who came out of ARPA-E was on their Clean Tech to Market group, thought that there would be great opportunities for taking advantage of the hardware, but also the intellectual resources that were available to the lab. And so they basically do a competition to bring in entrepreneurs, develop mentorship, and then make the facilities of the lab available. In our program, we're also exploring ways that we can help and assist entrepreneurs. So if you have suggestions, we're actually in the phase right now where we're designing our program for 2018 to 2020. we've set up some funding for incubators around the state, and we have a small grant program that's administered outside of the Energy Commission, so it actually has a more streamlined application process than the state bureaucratic process usually is, but it's for smaller $150,000 grants, and then has a Series B. If you're successful, you can compete for the next round of funding. So those two things, one is designed for your proof of concept, and then the incubators for support within 4 different regions of California. But we have some other things in the works to make test facilities available. And again, I'd just like to, we're having a workshop next Tuesday, and we're taking comments. If you have suggestions on what you think would be a more impactful approach, send in a letter.
Is that workshop open to the public?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And
it's open to the public. It's WebExed. It's, if you just go to the California Energy Commission and look for workshop on March 14th.
So the website is CEC.
Energy.ca.gov.
Energy.ca.gov. Yeah, great. So in the program, the $150,000 program, that's the one Danny Kennedy's running?
That's right.
Yeah,
CalSeed.
CalSeed.
CalSeed. Well, it's
CalSeed.
CalSEF is running the CalSeed program.
CalSeed, so that's CalSeed.
The good news and bad news is they had so many applicants in the first round that it'll be several months before the next round is done. It is open back up, but in the future it should run several times a year.
Yeah. Let me speak to that question too for a moment. The energy space has been around for 50,000 years, unlike the information space, which has only been 50 years. And so technology has been really well established and developed and exploited and so forth. And how many more percent can we get out of an electric motor? There's some more things you can do, but not a lot. You're not going to double performance or triple performance as we do in the semiconductor space. And the applications that we sell into in this space already have an existing solution, and you have to move somebody off of that solution and to yours, and you're competing on, because you're not giving somebody the ability to do something new. You're not competing on features, you're competing on price and delivery and maybe longevity of the product in your business. You have to prove those things out, and that's different. That's what's different about the clean energy space than, for example, the information space. And so what that means is that all of our projects take, as we all know, forever longer. And it's so much harder to get a little bit more improvement out of the hardware. And so there are some things like this coming into place. Cyclotron Road, which now is going to be expanded to the other 9 labs across the country, where at Cyclotron Road, all the equipment at Lawrence Berkeley Labs is available. And you can get grants and so forth, and you get a couple of years to work on something that fills that gap between the back of the envelope and maybe a working prototype and being able to go out and get something that you can take to a customer and maybe put into production. So there's a lot of stuff in that space. Cyclotron Road, there's another version of that that's going to be put in place at Fermilab in Chicago, and another one at Oak Ridge in Tennessee. I think then there's the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, which now has the Breakthrough Energy Fund, and this is 28 billionaires who put some money together to do these kinds of things. And I think this fund has just come together, or it's coming together right now. So I think that's another place you might be able to go.
Don't call us, we call you.
I'm sorry?
Don't call us, we call you. I was on that side.
Oh, you were. Well.
Unless you know him personally.
Find a way to find somebody who knows them personally, right? And then there's through MIT, there's another group that Sarah Kearney has started in Cambridge. It's called Prime Coalition, and her objective is to bring together family organizations and family money from a philanthropic standpoint, where they want to put the money into companies in this space, and they want to get a tax benefit as well, as a charitable contribution. And she's got some very clever things she's put together there. They funded 2 companies last year. They're looking at funding some more this year. It's Prime Coalition. I forgot what the URL is. But there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in this space to address this fact that it's tough to get funding. The gestation period is, it's 7, 8, 10, 12 years for companies in this space, right? So, other questions, Suds?
So, my impression is that the auctions for cap and trade have been pretty dismal lately, and part of it is because just Title 24 and other efficiency programs have reduced our emissions dramatically, so the cap might be too high. Do you have any comments on whether we should adjust the cap, or how do we fix this, or is there a problem? And maybe does a carbon tax, like Secretary Schultz and Baker have proposed, an alternative for California?
My memory is that under California's Central Climate Change Law, AB 32, it did allow a carbon tax, but it delegated to our Central Air Regulatory Agency in California, the California Air Resources Board, the decision as to what structure to put in place. And one of the interesting things to understand with California is the figures are, and I haven't updated them this year, but you can think generally about 70% of the greenhouse gas emission reductions that we need to achieve when we look out, first it was to 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050, are actually through our established programs. The world's most successful energy efficiency effort, renewables, all the things that we do to make California a leader on clean energy and transportation. Cap and trade, and it could have been carbon tax, is essentially another policy mechanism that's layered on top to achieve those remaining emission reductions, which are about 30%. And again, my percentages may be a bit off. And so we're very different from other places in that we have such robust programs already in place. The California Air Resources Board has a current proceeding that's public that people can get involved with and comment on, where they're updating their approach and structures for the state's greenhouse gas emission approaches. My personal view, because I get asked this a lot, is we're not going to switch over to a carbon tax, that we've invested a lot in cap and trade, and I think it's much more likely that CARB will make the modifications that it thinks are needed to get it to be more robust, as opposed to throwing it out and saying, let's start over with a carbon tax. Because there are risks with a carbon tax. You're basically, hoping the market responds to that price signal, whereas with a cap and trade, it's pretty definite. This is the cap on overall emissions. And so sort of the way California thinks about things is it tends to want to know that certainty. I think the real issue is going to be, if we're not getting those revenues from the auctions, that was going to be sort of like our golden egg, what happens then? And are we going to have, so I think that's more the issue, as opposed to we would just get rid of it and try to put a carbon tax in place.
I think there's uncertainty to the longevity, and so until there's clarity of the longevity, then people aren't going to invest in cap and trade. So, if there's a legislative signal to extend or give it a longer lifeline, I think we might see those prices come up.
So I think we're almost out of time here. Do we have time for one more, or what do you think?
I just wanted to come back to this
all
gentleman's
right,
question.
one more.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you. Unfortunately, Larry, could you maybe open the cost curves again? Because I found that interesting. I wanted to talk about, is it my turn? I'm not supposed to?
This one?
Me? Yeah. So, if you look at financing of it all, the cost decline was not necessarily because of a lot of venture capital. It was because of things like the feed-in tariff made it possible to play around with technology, to get to scale, and to deploy a lot of technology. So shouldn't we think a bit more about how could we make it easier for startups to actually run a couple of projects and to learn that? One part of funding the startup is the initial thing to develop the product, but the other one is to keep it alive and let it experiment to find a way to apply the technology. And are there project-driven grants? Is that a thought you have? A bit like Generate Capital is trying to bring it to the market? Any thoughts regarding that?
I'm not clear on the question. I mean,
So if you think that a project, a financial firm like Generate Capital that does projects and they accept a bit more risk in the technology than the traditional venture capital model that invests in technology directly but not in projects, and wouldn't that project approach actually be needed right now for a lot of startups that are struggling to put more than one or two pilot projects out in the field?
So your question is there's another sector in the finance sequence, and it's called project finance.
Yeah,
and it's very big, very large.
Yeah.
There's lots of people there, and the key is having an order from a customer. You know, it's you have an order, it's bankable. That's really the key.
Well, our program is designed to do demonstration projects. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking. Is to be able to take your technology and do an application in multiple locations and collect the data and prove that it works. That's a big part of what the program is. And even Diane was talking about demand response. That's sort of a catch-22. If you don't have the right regulatory structure and the right tariffs, then you don't develop the technologies that can respond. So what we've done in the program is to really establish shadow tariffs and allow customers and technology providers to basically practice and utilize that shadow tariff and demonstrate that there is a solution to this problem, and doing it in different applications with small commercial, large commercial, BMW, other different applications using the same transactive signal to collect the information on which sectors could provide what services. So, I mean, you should look to the program, because I think I'm not sure what your technology is, but that's the purpose, is to provide that testing ground.
Okay, well, this has been a great event, and I'm going to ask Doug to come up and have a few conclusory remarks, and while he's coming up, let's give the panel our applause.
So if you just stay for just a sec, 2 minutes is about Next event we're going to do is on April 18th. Frank O'Sullivan is the Director of Research and Analysis at MIT Energy Initiative. That's what MITI means. And so he's going to be coming out to talk about reinventing America's electricity system, talk about all the trends that are going on, the technologies behind them, and so on. It should be very interesting. Want to thank the panelists and our moderator here, Larry. So we have a special treat for you. As is customary, we give out a bottle of California Cabernet. This particular one scored 92 points on Wine Spectator and was number 32 on their list of the top 100 of 2016. So it's a very nice cab, and it's affordable. So who knows? You may like it so much you try another one. And Laurie, I don't know if you feel like you can't accept this, but you can. All you have to do is claim that it was given to you as a gift, and it's all right for somebody in
Just
the
depends on the value.
Okay,
So.
well, it's not that high.
It's reportable over a certain amount.
Okay. So anyway, so let's pass them out one at a time. Yeah, you go. Yeah, go ahead. Right.
Thank you.
We really do appreciate it. I hope you like red wine, and I think you'll like this one.
Who doesn't?
All right. And still thanking people. We want to thank Silicon Valley Bank, especially Jordan Canis here, who is our supporter, sponsor, if you will. And a few others behind the scenes that were involved in both the food service as well as facilities. And then we can't do this without all of our other volunteers in the club. And also our videographer, Hank Magnuski, who's done almost every one of these and is doing this one tonight. Just a terrific job. For those of you who have colleagues who may want to see this video of this, you can find it on our website, www.mitcnc.org. CEC.org and under Events Media Archive. So it's and all of the past events are on that in that list. And then you see our other people here that have supported, including the welcome people and so on. So thank you all very much for coming. Hope to see you at another event soon. And have safe travel back home.